the most important budget since the Great Depression. Kia ora everyone and welcome to the Herald's coverage of Budget 2020. Prior to today, the government had dreams, a $12 billion plus infrastructure spend up. Last year, it posted the biggest surplus in a decade. Coronavirus, however, putting paid to that massive surplus. We now see a government desperate to fend off what economists predict could be the worst economic contraction in modern history. Today, they give us a preview on what they have planned so far. The PM and Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, calling it the jobs budget. They've already spent some $22 billion mitigating COVID-19. We've seen the wage subsidy and relief for business already. So the question is, what next? Will the wage subsidy be extended? Will there be support for mortgage holders? What else is there for small business? The woman with the answers is Claire Trevett, our senior political journalist who has been hunkering down in the beehive with the budget for the last hour or so. Claire, go and tell us what's in it.
Yes, well, Jacinda Ardern and Finance Minister Grant Robertson told us this would be a spending budget, and boy are they doing that. The numbers are massive. Normally we're talking about new spending of about $3 to $4 billion for a budget. This year, $50 billion on COVID alone. The Spend Act will push us well into deficit from that surplus position you mentioned. We're looking at a $10 billion deficit for the next 2 years running. It's forecast to shrink gradually over that, but won't be back to surplus for at least another 8 years. This is all new spending, and this is where it's going. Most of the COVID package so far is going into jobs. So the wage subsidy package will indeed be extended, but only in a more targeted basis. So it will be from now on for companies who can show they have a 50% drop in revenue from over a month from when they apply compared to last year, which they are expecting will cover fewer businesses. That will extend for another 12 weeks, and then they decide what to do from then. On top of that, you've got a massive infrastructure spend. They're adding another $3 billion in infrastructure onto the $15 billion that they've already allocated for infrastructure. That is partly about boosting the economy and also about creating jobs. They are doing a big public housing program, 8,000 new state houses and social houses for transitional housing purposes. There is $1 billion for jobs in the environment, which was what the Green Party was pushing from. And where is all this money coming from? I'll tell you where. It's coming from debt. So debt will rise from 19% of GDP to 30% in this year alone, and it will peak at 54% in 2023. That is $200 billion that we will owe in 2023 compared to $50 billion now. The big questions are, will it work? How will we pay it back? And later today we'll have politicians from all of the parties. We will have analysts and Finance Minister Grant Robertson himself.
Yeah, you raised the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, there, Claire. I understand Grant Robertson is speaking in the House now, delivering his budget. No doubt at some point as well, National will have a lot to say with regard to that as well. Let's go to Grant Robertson.
And today we take further steps in enabling New Zealanders together to respond, recover and rebuild. These are not words I thought I would use to describe the budget only a couple of months ago. There are many words and concepts that New Zealanders would have been surprised to hear themselves using in quite the way they are. Bubble, physical distancing, PPE, contact tracing. You're on mute, Damien. Level 4, Level 3, and yes, as of today, Level 2. Another word is unprecedented. It is one we have heard and said almost daily. The lives of all New Zealanders have been affected to an extent none of us would have thought possible only a matter of months ago. It is also a word that we have to keep using. This pandemic has not finished. Its health and economic stories are still being told. We can be very proud of, as a country, of our health response, and it must go on. And now we also have to put a team of 5 million to work on our economic response. The initiatives that we've put in place since March 17, just 2 months ago, have formed the first stage of our plan to face COVID-19. Respond, go hard, go early. We were faced with a choice between a public health catastrophe, as has been seen in other countries, or unprecedented and difficult measures. There were no costless decisions in this situation, and nor was there any playbook to go by. I know that our success in controlling the virus has come at a price, with hundreds of thousands of Kiwi workers and employers having to stay home, and jobs and businesses lost. But I stand by our view that the best economic response is a health response. By going hard and going early, getting on top of the virus while protecting jobs and businesses, we now have a head start on many countries around the world to get the economy moving again. Mr Speaker, I want to thank our coalition partner New Zealand First and our confidence and supply partner, the Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand. This has been a budget put together in extraordinary circumstances, and your cooperation, commitment and flexibility has been much appreciated. I also want to place on record my appreciation for the massive effort of hundreds of public servants over the last 2 months, including in the preparation of this budget. Many people, including those at the Treasury and in our ministerial offices, have worked 7 days a week for that whole period of time. Their dedication is a measure of true public service. The core of Budget 2020 will boost critical public services, fund infrastructure and provide the unprecedented investment needed for the second and third stages of our plan to face COVID-19, recover and rebuild. Through this budget, we are establishing the $50 billion COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund. This fund builds on top of the initial $12.1 billion package and the $12 billion New Zealand Upgrade Program that we announced in January. This is the most significant financial commitment by a New Zealand government in modern history. The fund does not represent a target for spending, but gives us the flexibility to be able to respond as necessary. The fund will be critical in seeing New Zealand through the economic struggle that is coming and rebuilding our economy for the better over the long term. Our recovery and rebuild will be based on getting New Zealanders back to work. This budget is about jobs, keeping people in their jobs wherever we can, supporting businesses and sectors to create new jobs through infrastructure, housing and more, directly creating jobs that help restore our environment and conservation estate, and training and retraining people for new jobs at a scale we have never seen before. It also begins to rebuild our social infrastructure, acknowledging the toll this crisis has taken on our communities and on the people and places that hold them together. It is a once-in-a-generation budget. It is bold because the task we face is monumental. We said at the outset of this crisis that while we would not be able to save every job or every business, we would do everything in our power to protect people and our economy. Today we go further and begin to chart a course to a better tomorrow. Mr Speaker, coming into this crisis, New Zealand was fortunate to have a fundamentally strong economy and fiscal position. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, real GDP growth in the year to December 19 was higher than many of our international peers. Unemployment at 4% was historically low, and wage growth of 3% was at decade-long highs. New Zealand's fiscal position was also strong. The coalition government had delivered on its plan to reduce net core crown debt below 20% of GDP and achieved $12.8 billion of Obligor surpluses in our first 2 years in office. These were conscious choices that did not go unchallenged. But this strong fiscal position, built on the work of Bill English and Michael Cullen, now means that we are much better placed than many other countries to use our balance sheet to cushion the blow of COVID-19 on the economy and to protect the well-being of New Zealanders. The rainy day has arrived, but we are well prepared. Many other countries are not starting from the same position of strength that we are. The UK started with net debt above 75%, the USA 90%, and Ireland 40%. Many countries are already well over 100% as they respond to the virus. The IMF expects a decline in global activity not seen in peacetime since the Great Depression of the 1930s, with annual global growth expected to fall to -3% in 2020. Although we are doing everything in our power to push back on these trends, there is no sugarcoating the impact this crisis has had on the government's books. Treasury's forecasts and alternative scenarios indicate that there will be a sharp fall in economic activity and a substantial rise in unemployment. New Zealand's real GDP growth rate is forecast to decline from 2.8% in the year ending June 2019 to minus 4.6% in the year ending June 2020, driven by a quarterly decline in GDP of over 20% in the June 2020 quarter. Annual average GDP growth is forecast to return to positive from the year ending September 2021 onwards.
And with me now I have National Party Finance spokesman Paul Goldsmith. Paul Goldsmith, you've had a small chance to look at the budget, and tell me, is your verdict?
Well, look, very, very sobering figures in the budget. We're seeing that New Zealanders are going to be borrowing an extra $140 billion of debt over the next 4 years. That works out about nearly $80,000 a household. And we're going to see possibly 150,000 New Zealanders lose their jobs. So very, very sobering reading, seeing the cost of this virus.
In terms of the size of the $50 billion COVID response package, do you agree with the scale of that and also the targeting of it in the areas that targeted it?
We're very concerned about this. We're in an economic hole and we needed a clear plan to get out of that hole. Instead, what we frankly have is a $50 billion slush fund that the government isn't announcing the detail about. They're just going to spend over the next 4 months in the lead up to the election. And I think we needed much clearer path out of this problem.
So what would you see as that money best used for?
Well, there's been a couple of useful things. We've seen the extension of the wage subsidy, and we'll give a tick to that. But beyond that, there's very, very little in terms of actually growing the economy and jobs and getting us back on track. Like I say, only just a very large fund that they may spend on who knows what.
There were some forecasts indicating that New Zealand's GDP growth would be back in the positive again within 2 years. Do you think that is correct or overly optimistic?
Yeah, look, the Treasury forecasts seem to be very optimistic to me. They have tax revenues only falling modestly over the next 2 years, and even then they're projecting huge deficits over the next 3 years. So, look, I think New Zealanders need to be concerned about the overall size of the debt, and they need a government that can get us out of this quickly. And so I think what we'll be talking about over the next 4 months is how do we stop the damage, and that's about getting people back to work. I think, we've seen not very much in education, but the most useful thing they could do in the tertiary sector is allow students, international students, to get back and save 55,000 jobs in that area. But they're not getting on with that. They're just building up this big fund with no clear allocation of where it's going to be spent. So we're very disappointed.
Okay.
Righto, Claire, thanks very much for that. Well, let's just recap some of that information that we've had so far. $50 billion in new spending and about $140 billion over 3 years. Like you heard from Goldsmith there, the finance spokesperson for National, that's about $80,000 per household. They're saying that we should be concerned about that number, but not really critical of the fact that they in fact need to do and provide some stimulus there. There's the extension of the wage subsidy as well, which we've heard about. Now, that's going to prove a bit of an issue for some businesses because it requires a revenue drop of 50%. There will be a lot of businesses that won't be within that 50% threshold. So obviously look, I suppose, for Grant Robertson to justify that when we speak to him a little bit later on. We're going to go back now to Parliament TV. He's speaking, I believe, still. We'll have more in a moment.
Today, we are announcing a further $15.9 billion in funding focused on key areas that will kickstart economic recovery, create decent, sustainable jobs, ensure the security of our most vulnerable, and lay the groundwork for us to build a better nation together. Mr. Speaker, this government has already provided unprecedented support to cushion the blow of COVID-19 for businesses across New Zealand. As well as the wage subsidy scheme, businesses have been supported through significant changes in the taxation system, low and interest-free loans, together with supportive changes to laws and regulations. This budget goes further, with a $4 billion business support package to keep people in work and position businesses for recovery and growth. For many businesses, the struggle in the face of COVID-19 is not over.
And with me now is the Herald's very own Fran O'Sullivan. Fran, you were in the lockup with me and you actually told me that this was your 40th budget that you have covered.
Yes, it is, and it's quite extraordinary. I mean, the first one actually was for radio back in the day in 1981 for private radio, which of course is News Talk now, and then through a myriad of publications. But it's been one of the most outstandingly different budgets that I've seen over the years. I've described it as the rolling mall on steroids. I mean, if you actually go back to the rolling mall, that was actually coined by Sir Bill English back in 2009 for his budget. And I think what we've seen now is Grant Robertson has really amped it up.
He said today that he didn't agree with austerity, and he certainly proved that.
Yeah.
We're normally talking millions.
Yeah, we're certainly talking multi-billions now. And what he has done, Claire, is put a floor under the economy, and what he'll try and do is arrest the personal and business and economic damage that this COVID-19 pandemic has caused. But also it's been done with one eye on the election coming up. And when I put a question to him today about would they, for instance, look at reductions in company taxes, that type of thing? Did they consider it? He kind of deadpanned that, but then said that anything on tax would be part of the agenda, depending on who was in the make-up after the election. So, boy, oh boy, it has to be there somewhere.
Yes, he didn't want to talk about tax at all, did he? But
no.
You do have that massive debt building up.
That's correct. Yeah.
Massive debt finish compared to where we were, and that has to be paid back somehow, and that would be tax or growth.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So I think the numbers. I mean, we don't know. As Thomas has said and others have said, we don't exactly know what the story is going to be because we don't know the health of the companies. So some of the assumptions around company tax might be heroic and personal income taxes, but sooner or later they'll want to pay it down fairly fast. And when you look at the numbers, the debt track, the track of the deficits returning down to a more sensible percentage of GDP, I mean, that's happening in a fairly short time. We're only talking a matter of a few years here. So I think, your questions around is the budget and Treasury forecast rosy? Well, I think there's an element of blue sky in there, but of course they don't want to frighten people off either, and that's part of the psychology of a budget, that you don't frighten companies and people off to the point where they just decide to, just really can out and not give it a go. So I think it was instructive today that from June 10, companies who have seen a 50% decline in revenue over a month can actually apply for an extension of the wage subsidy. Notably, it's only for 8 weeks, not 12, which would make it look like an election bribe, but it is actually going to be helpful. And there's a lot in this budget to help migrate people to work in the environment, to work on farms, more trades training, that type of thing, because we're losing an avalanche of jobs in industries like tourism, for instance, and those people have to go somewhere. So I think there's been some really good humanitarian, if you like, measures in this budget.
Well, unemployment is expected to peak at 9.6%, which was one of the rosier forecasts that Treasury gave when they were initially indicating what the impact could be. Mm-hmm. You're involved with business. Do you think there was enough in there for business, and in particular the tourism sector gets that package to promote domestic tourism and help them, but there's also strong indications from government people, without being so blunt, that tourism operators may just have to fail.
Yes, and I think this is one of the one of the issues in the budget. If you're looking at it in, I guess, a traditional economic lens, you would say part of the creative destruction of capitalism is that some companies should fail in a situation like this. If the market's not there, they can't be propped up. And so you will expect, a range of companies. They have talked about 1/3 of those in tourism, for instance, that might fail. But I think what the government, and some of those will just be day-to-day, they won't be big operators, but what the government has tried to do is make sure the people employed in these areas and these companies do get a chance to take on jobs elsewhere. And some of these jobs are unskilled. They might have to do, more physical work, that type of thing, if you're talking about environmental roles and farming roles. But that's part of what has to happen if people are to stay employed and contributing to the economy.
If you look at the flavour of the packages they've put forward, there is a very, as much as you can, a very Labour kind of tinge to what they are going to spend that investment boosting on. There's the State House program, the Kiwi Rail for New Zealand First, and the trades training, that kind of stuff, and the infrastructure spending, about which there are very few details. Are they doing what they can to try and keep to the Labour kind of principles, while still having to fork out all this money rather than roads?
Yeah, I think it's very much a tribal type budget when you look, particularly from a Labour perspective. Puts the state right back in there when it comes to working alongside industry and unions of people to determine what the future of work might be, particularly when it comes to retraining. And there's a floor under the economy and a lot there to ensure health and schooling and everything is maintained. And that might well be a budget for these times. But it does open the way for National to be able to put out a contrary view, which might be to be more incentivised, either through taxation, particularly around company tax, but also working to create funds which invest and work alongside companies rather than actually the state deciding through this 50 billion, which is actually now down to 0.2 billion now, because actually 30 billion is already spent. So that's quite a lot of money, but it may not be enough when you look forward a few years, particularly given that a large lump will be spent going into the election.
Think back to the last finance minister who had to deal with, admittedly, now a very mini crisis compared to this, was Bill English, of course. How do you think he would feel about having to deliver this kind of budget? Would he be in anaphylactic shock, or would he?
Oh, no, I mean, I've been on one or two webinars where Sir Bill has been talking in the last week or two. I think he would approach it very calmly, very phlegmatically, as is his nature. He would work with Treasury on the challenge, and there would be that same endeavour to put a floor under the economy. But I think once that had occurred, he would be looking to how can you incentivise business and basically support business. And part of that comes down to the dynamics, the respect given to business, all of that, so that business feels confident to get up out there and grow again.
All right, welcome back up to here in Auckland with Liam Dan, the business editor at large. Liam, 50 billion is an enormous amount of money. Your thoughts?
Well, everything about this crisis in economic terms is enormous, and not surprised by that. The markets won't be surprised by that. It was always going to be the biggest spend, and I think it would have been regardless of which political party we had in power. The issue will be how it's spent. And
you noticed that with Paul Goldsmith, didn't you? There wasn't a great deal of criticism around the particular package itself, but the old typical sort of opposition thing where we need someone with sound judgment to manage getting us back out of this. I suppose a bit of electioneering in there as well.
Sure.
Are you happy with where it's sort of going? There's sort of money in there for rail and stuff like that. It looks very left wing in terms of where the money tends to go. It goes into the sort of state areas, and there doesn't seem to be that much going towards talking with business, I guess.
Well, I mean, it was always, in terms of state spending, it was always going to look like a big Keynesian left-wing thing. Yeah. Things like rail, well, that's a point of political difference that's ongoing with these parties. But broadly, I think he's walked handled the balancing act quite well.
Yeah.
The verdict, we won't get that for months or years. Yeah. You're always going to be vulnerable because of the uncertainty of the pandemic to a criticism that you've focused too much on short term and where's the long term plan out of here. I've heard that.
Yeah. Or
alternatively, you're going to get criticised for too much high-minded thinking and not enough in the here and now. Well, there's a bit of emergency stuff as expected, and then you've got some unallocated funds, which I know Paul Goldsmith was a bit wary of, but you it is because they're in opposition, and that's a lot of headroom going into an election.
Sure.
But
the nature of this that you and I have spoken before is you and I covered the budget last year. Nobody saw remotely any of the spending that had to come at the beginning of this year, right? So that budget was sort of thrown out the window, and there's a good chance, given we don't know about things like vaccines, we don't know about what will happen to the global economy, we're an export economy, we don't know when planes will be back in the sky again and when tourism will be coming, right? So it was kind of always there. One of the things that got me, and you and I have spoken about this before, was the wage subsidy extension and the 50% revenue drop mark. To get a hold of that, there's going to be surely furious business that's going to look at that and say, no way is that fair.
Yeah, sure. Although to your point, where would you put that on the political spectrum? Because that is almost the brutal reality of the market.
That's the market.
At some point, they have to. There's money. We were looking for money to keep that going. There's sector spending as well. There's tourist money and so on. But at some point, we know that unemployment's going to soar. There's like 100,000 people losing jobs. Yeah. That's horrendous. But you can't. You have to sort out which businesses are going to be viable long term, and that's unfortunately what will happen over the coming months. The coming months are going to be some of the toughest that New Zealand has seen for generations, maybe since the Depression, maybe since the period of 87 to 91. So it makes sense to have money up your sleeve because we don't know exactly where the worst of it falls, but they can't keep funding endlessly. And of course, if they did, they would be accused of,
Well, I said to you before, I played the other argument, which was kicking the can down the road, right? You keep subsidising these businesses, and these businesses are not.
Well, that's it. They're vulnerable to arguments on both sides, but at the same time, both arguments are very hard for them to hold too much at the moment. Anyone facing this has to to find a balanced path. You could lean a little bit one way or the other, but until we get more certainty, and so to me, the issue about the politics of it will be how well the money is spent, and so that's where I would expect National to be looking, but it's all in front of us at the moment.
Is it a winning budget for Robertson? Because this is so bizarre. This is an election year budget, and we would have never kind of imagined this, right? Is this a winning budget, or are there plenty of options in here for National to capitalise on? The initial reaction seemed perhaps not. It seemed, well, okay, yeah, we understand that you need to spend money. They don't want to be the ones that are going to be critical of how much money is being spent and then see the economy go off a cliff.
I mean, it does give them some headroom for spending that in the run up to the budget to tweak if they were really cynical about it. I don't know if they, they've got some big challenges ahead of them, and they'll take them as they come. But the difficulty is that the quality of the spending won't really emerge, and the success of the recovery, we're not going to know about that for a long time. But I'd imagine the elation around, or the great support for this government that has sort of come out of the way the lockdown has gone and things, that'll fade a bit. I mean, the tough bit with all the jobs is it's traditionally not good for governments. The longer it goes on, the more it becomes a kind of a grind. The drama of the lockdown fades, and we're into just a really nasty
to a certain extent
recession.
It goes dragging out, convincing people to stick with you just till you get to the election, and then we look at what the numbers here. There were unemployment numbers there of maybe slightly rosy at 9.8% when you look at some of the international economists are talking about and the global recession, right? Optimistic numbers, but every party does that.
I mean, they're around 10%. I mean, I've seen range from sort of 8.5 to 12 or 13 from a whole bunch of economists, and some of that depends on the scenarios they use as to how well we go with the COVID-19 response, which I would say in most of those cases we're in the best case scenario right now. So that could mean it could even be potentially lower, although 9.8 is still terrible. I mean, it's
GFC 2008 is not even a place to start. Really,
no, you've got to go back to 1991 really, and those years when perhaps you and I didn't have to worry about it too much because we were
very
around at university and things.
Yeah.
But it was tough coming out of the job market. And that procession of companies falling over and big job losses announced. We started to see it in the last week or so. Every day,
massive. That's what we were talking about. 3 stories every day of big companies as well with cash. We know that we're talking to Ingrid Cronin Knight, MIOB's country manager, later on. We know that small businesses tend to sail really close to the wind, and we've got the big ones really doing some massive
stuff. So the
stuff.
messaging, you pick up from this government that, well, certainly Ardern and Robertson are very quick to listen to some of the commentary that comes out from business commentators and economists and so on, so that the messaging, once we sort of got to level 2, it shifted very quickly to this jobs. Now, whether you believe this is the right formula, it's the right messaging is that they understand that unemployment is, pretty much where it's at.
And business bailouts are never particularly popular anyway, right? We saw with what happened with Air New Zealand that wasn't.
There may still be, room. There's money in the tank, and there will be. They've got to look at, how crucial those decisions about which businesses can afford to fail and New Zealand can afford to have fail or not.
But we look to hear business bailouts called about the jobs, right? It's all about the jobs as opposed to this business.
Yeah, although sometimes they're too big to fail because something like Air New Zealand is just so vital to our economy.
Sure.
And there may be others like that where there isn't an obvious replacement there or.
And they can see that there's light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, it's a kind of an essential service, I suppose, but certainly probably nothing like what we've seen. Final question, they've already spent $23 billion, right? Is this going to have an effect on our credit rating? I
don't think so. I think the debt that we've seen, enormous as it sounds, it takes us up to around, I think was it 90 billion up to around 200, so that's going from where we were at 20% of GDP, maybe up to sort of towards 50% of GDP. Give or take GDP actually coming down a bit, but in the ratios. So that's in line with the expectations. We knew that was going to be big. I'm not sure that, a National Party may not have wanted to borrow so much, but they would have also been borrowing big. They may have been talking about paying it down a bit sooner. I don't think we heard.
Well, they had to with Christchurch, right? We've seen this before. They've had to borrow just as the left's
and we
now
will
borrowing.
have to again, because New Zealand, unlike Japan and those countries that have all got much worse debt to GDP ratios that Robertson will talk about. He talked about the UK in his speech. New Zealand is a small country, doesn't have a great savings rate, and is prone to things like earthquakes, droughts, and very vulnerable to international shocks, as this proves. So, you can't. The debt has to come back down to a more manageable level at some point, but now is not the time to talk about it. At least that's the way Robertson's played it. I think.
So the verdict is good. It's a question about where this money goes. They've made the money available, but where does it go and how responsible is it?
What I'm saying is I think they have handled Budget Day very well. The real challenge is still absolutely ahead.
We're going to hear from the Deloitte Chief Executive, Thomas Pipos, who's down in Wellington with Claire.
Mr Speaker, the budget invests nearly $1 billion to support the core provision of education services.
Just you and I.
This will provide substantial support to students across all levels of education,
we can talk for hours
while
about
also targeting investment in areas that we know will benefit students who need it the most.
The
education package makes a significant investment in our early childhood sector. The sector has been placed under particular strain in recent years, and this has been exacerbated by COVID-19. The budget includes cost adjustments for ECE subsidies and a pay boost for early childhood teachers. The government will make further announcements on support for this sector in the near future. The school property investment package will invest $115.1 million to help expand, maintain and enhance our schools. New Zealand's primary industries play a critical role in growing our economy. As we move further into the post-COVID-19 economic recovery, our primary sector is more important than ever. The core package invests nearly $500 million in initiatives that will ensure our primary industries are supported and sustainable now and into the future. Funding in the package will support primary industries with their existing operations and preventing or mitigating the impacts of biosecurity threats and enabling implementation of climate change and ETS reforms. Budget 2020 provides a boost in investment to support a safe and equitable justice sector. We're building community safety through investment in new technology, court buildings and corrections. A key initiative in this package is the Next Generation Critical Communications Program, which will invest in bringing state-of-the-art communication capabilities to police, fire and ambulance, supporting healthier, safer and more connected communities. This will see our emergency services finally able to communicate with the public and with one another all over New Zealand in a safe and reliable manner. The package also provides funding to enable continued access to justice services, such as funding for legal aid, community law centres, the Canterbury Earthquakes Insurance Tribunal. Additionally, it provides funding for the newly established Criminal Cases Review Commission. Budget 2020 reaffirms this government's commitment to supporting arts and culture in New Zealand, ensuring that funding is available to preserve our nation's taonga, promote creativity and celebrate our diversity and history. The package provides support for the local film industry and culturally significant historical collections, as well as ensuring the accessibility of public media platforms to diverse audiences, such as New Zealanders with hearing impairments and those from our Pacific communities. It also includes the significant Preserving the Nation's Memory project that will build new facilities for our public records. The Budget 2020 package includes funding for critical pressures in the defence sector. This funding investment in areas such as ICT and defence estate infrastructure and the replacement of the hard-working Defence Force C-130H Hercules fleet. The package also includes an additional $55.6 million for New Zealand to provide further official development assistance, particularly to our Pacific neighbours during a time of great need. It will bring New Zealand's overall ODA spending to almost 0.3% of forecasted gross national income for the first time in 40 years. Budget 2020 builds on investment made through the New Zealand Upgrade Programme and includes more than $1 billion to improve transport across the country. This investment will enhance the resilience and reliability of national rail and ferry networks and, over time, contribute to reduce our carbon footprint through decreasing emissions. I particularly want to highlight in this package the $400 million capital investment to help replace the inter-islander ferries. New ferries will provide a more secure and resilient link between the North and South Islands. Mr Speaker, the significant investments we're making in public services will be of the utmost importance, with the country now moving out of our initial response stage and into our recovery stage. These investments complement and support our targeted COVID-19 response, recovery and rebuilding measures. Mr Speaker, today's budget represents the next steps in our recovery and rebuild. The world is still learning what the impacts of COVID-19 will be. We owe it to New Zealanders to work carefully through our next steps, recognising that the decisions we are making will define the lives and livelihoods of many people for years to come. The weight of those decisions comes with a spirit of optimism in what New Zealand can be. The glimmer of silver lining on this darkest of clouds comes from the knowledge that we have the opportunity to build back better. There are few times in your life when you get to hit the reset button. It's a privilege that many countries do not have right now, as they still struggle to get the virus under control, and it is an opportunity we will not squander. Our rebuild must be one that takes the very best of who we are and uses it to take on the issues and challenges in front of them. Some of them are old: inequality, low productivity, polluted rivers. Some of them are newer: the transition to a low-carbon economy, adjusting to the rapidly changing world of work, maintaining social cohesion. All of them are in front of us in stark relief. We can draw on the lessons of the past as to how to deal with them. The answers lie in the great traditions of the first Labour government, who rebuilt New Zealand after the Great Depression. It was a time when they understood a genuine partnership between government and the people, that each and every person in this country deserves the right to take up the chances afforded by being lucky enough to live in, as my predecessor Peter Fraser called it, this green and pleasant land. They built houses, rail and roads. They created the welfare state and a strong public health system, and they backed shopkeepers and manufacturers. We are taking those principles into the modern era. We can also draw lessons of the past as to what not to do in response to a major economic shock. In this case, Mr Speaker, I can draw on the experiences of my own life. As the economic carnage of the 1980s and 90s wreaked havoc in our communities, I saw that up close. It was based on a tired set of ideas, that the market would save us, that if the government sat on the sidelines, all would be well. Well, it didn't work out that way, and lives and livelihoods were lost. That will not happen, not on the watch of this government. We know that we must work in partnership with iwi, business, unions, community groups, every one of the team of 5 million, to make sure that we not only get through this, but that we thrive on the other side. That means continuing to be bold, as we have been in the last 2 months. We're not always all going to agree on the path, but it must be one that gives each and every New Zealander a stake in our future. Decent, well-paid work that provides respect and dignity. Looking after our most vulnerable, where we make good on our promise to future generations that we will take on climate change and leave them a legacy to build from. This budget takes the responsible path of investing to respond, recover and rebuild. It takes us down a path where we will face choices as to how we begin to repay some of our debt. There will be difficult choices then, as there are difficult choices today. But I promise you this, Mr. Speaker. This government will never put the burden of those choices on those who can least afford it. We will not cut the services that are their lifelines. We will not preach austerity, but line our pockets with tax cuts.
That's right.
No, Mr. Speaker. We will rebuild this country with hard work, innovation, creativity, compassion and courage. We will grow our economy sustainably to pay back our debt. We will fairly share that burden, and above all, we will do it together. There are still tough times ahead, but we have made it this far in fighting COVID-19 by drawing on every bit of who we are as New Zealanders. Kind but tough, fair but forthright, single-minded but united in action. It is just the end of the beginning. The next chapters are ours to write. Kia maia, kia atawhai, kia kaha. Be bold, be kind, be strong. He waka e ka noa. We are all in this together. Order.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr. Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, nothing in recent history has brought about such global disruption as the COVID-19 pandemic. Kiwis have sacrificed much through the restrictions of lockdown, but we can all be proud that the collective efforts of everyone have so far worked well. Today is not just about the budget, but about the direction of New Zealand more generally. Because the decisions we make now are generation-defining ones that will affect the next decade and beyond. This is about whether we have a society where people have jobs and growth, or are saddled with uncertainty, debt and taxes. Tens of thousands of Kiwis have already lost their jobs, and similarly large numbers of business people have had to close their doors for good. These New Zealanders have, through no fault of their own, paid a huge sacrifice because of COVID-19. You've lost your livelihoods and the nest eggs you worked so hard to build up. National stands with you. It's important we take a moment to reflect on the last 8 weeks. A lot of our response has gone incredibly well. New Zealanders have self-isolated and social distanced and sacrificed. We've flattened the curve. But just having a low number of COVID-19 cases isn't success. When we have tens of thousands of people out of work and more coming. Figures from the Reserve Bank yesterday estimate that there will be 150,000 job losses over the next 6 months. This budget puts it at 160,000. First credit where credit is due. This government's speed at getting the wage subsidy scheme up and running reduced early economic calamity. Our lockdown, however, has proved excessively hard. As I've said, workers and businesses have watched in horror as week after week of lockdown has washed away the foundations of their businesses because they've spent, I should say, years or decades building. Right. 1,000 people a day are joining the dole queue since lockdown began, and those numbers are increasing. That is 1,000 people a day who are losing their livelihoods. 1,000 people a day who face a very uncertain future. 1,000 people a day who don't know how they're going to pay their bills. Having gone hard and early on lockdown, we've gone soft and slow.
And with me now I have the Green Party co-leader James Shaw. James Shaw, a bit of a win for the Greens in the budget in form of the $1.1 billion for jobs relating to environmental projects. How else did you see the budget today?
Well, obviously we were absolutely delighted with that because we've been pushing for a green reset, and it's clear that that is the direction of travel that this budget goes in. But every part of this budget is about jobs. It's about keeping people in their jobs where possible. Where it's not possible, it's about retraining, getting them to their next job as soon as possible. It's about looking after people who don't have a job to make sure that they can continue to provide for their families. And then, like the green jobs announcement today, it's about creating new jobs and getting people into work as fast as we can.
Who sorts out those jobs? Is it like Department of Conservation and regional councils, or is it private enterprises?
It's all of that, all over the country, right? So we've had iwi, we've had environmental NGOs, councils, local communities, all saying, look, they've got things, projects ready to go, and the work that will be happening through the Department of Conservation, Ministry for the Environment and MPI.
So this is almost like a little greenie provincial growth fund, a greenie growth fund.
There's certainly going to be plenty of growth. We're going to be restoring wetlands, natural landscapes, planting trees, getting rid of predators and advancing the predator-free vision for New Zealand. And all of that conveniently is going to soak up quite a lot of carbon dioxide too.
And how confident are you that the workforce will be there for it, who want to and are able to do that kind of work?
Well, look, if we don't need the jobs, then we won't spend the money. But the projections are that we are going to see a real spike in unemployment, and what we're doing here, and Grant has just finished saying this in his speech, we're taking a leaf out of the New Deal that ended the Great Depression. We're actually investing directly in creating new jobs to build our way out of the recession.
And do the looming debt levels worry you any iota?
Well, of course they do. We're borrowing tens of billions of dollars, essentially off future generations, to get us through this crisis. I think that means that we've got both a moral and an economic imperative to put that money to good work, actually making life easier for those future generations. That's why the jobs package that we announced today is so significant.
And in terms of how would you like to see that paid back?
Well, we're going to be paying debt back the way that we normally pay debt back. Conveniently, of course, interest rates are absolutely rock bottom at the moment, so the cost of borrowing is extremely low. But if we invest that money wisely, it will all pay for itself. There will be a good return on investment for future generations.
Through growth. Through economic growth, you're talking about.
Yeah.
In terms of tax policy, Grant Robertson said that was firmly not on the table today, and not. But it is something that political parties will have to look at. Have the Greens looked at that yet?
No, we're actually still kind of working through it. Obviously, the crisis in the lockdown period has kind of changed things for us as they have for everybody else. But it's really clear that as we think about how we recover, that we are going to need to broaden the tax base, because we do get tax from a pretty narrow range of sources, and revenue from those sources is falling off a cliff right now. Yeah. So in the future, as we do rebuild, we are going to need to say, how does this happen, and ensure that actually everyone's contributing fairly.
And the government has so far kept about $20 billion of its now $63 billion in total COVID kind of packages in the kitty for the future, for whatever future needs may arise. Is that in anticipation of a second wave? Or
look, I think that is an entirely appropriate response to the fact that we are in extremely uncertain territory. So we do not have perfect information. It is very difficult to predict which scenario is going to turn out to be true. Therefore, you've got to hold some back to allow yourself to make decisions as we go.
And in terms of Green Party initiatives, did you actually lose anything that, if it wasn't for COVID-19, would have been in this budget? Or have you just refashioned?
Well, no. I mean, things are completely different now than they were 2 months ago, and so the things that we had been planning on just wouldn't necessarily be appropriate. So we've had to. Some of these things have been designed from scratch. Some of them are existing programs that we've retasked and, in some cases, scaled up, but really changed in order to deal with the crisis that's in front of us.
Okay.
Righto, welcome back to the Herald Newsroom, and let's give you a recap of this massive budget day. Massive, not only is it in the budget day itself, but also the spending. My goodness, $50 billion we have in new spending. The Prime Minister saying that is because this budget is all about jobs, jobs, jobs. She says it could save around about 138,000 jobs. Most of this money going to the extension of the wage subsidy that most people know about, right? So there is a catch on this one, though, and there's been criticism of how the wage subsidy has been implemented so far. The catch is the businesses accepting the wage subsidy now must have suffered at least a 50% drop in revenue. There will be, of course, questions from small businesses who will say that is totally not fair. And, you know, if you're in 40%, what on earth happens there? But that is the cutoff point. Liam Dan spoke about it before, essentially them saying they don't want to be seen as the old school left-wing government that lets businesses that should be failing not fail. And what's sort of interesting with that, though, is how the money itself has been spent. And it's been a target of the National Party. They haven't been so critical of exactly what it is, you know, how much money is being spent, but what it's being spent on. There's money going into things like, obviously, I said the extension of the wage subsidy, but also $1.1 billion for the environment. There is also, here's another example, $220 million to extend the school lunches initiative, $400 million targeting the tourism area, which obviously people will argue nobody really truly knows where exactly and when the tourism industry should bounce back. We're going to go back now. I think Simon Bridges is talking in Parliament.
But they are certainty under a Labour-led government. What we need now is an economic recovery strategy that gets New Zealand working again, rather than wayward spending, debt and taxes. Every day that New Zealand isn't working again, the debt and the taxes increase. Even now at level 2, where more workplaces can open, too many restrictions remain. There are too many bureaucrats angsting over every aspect of our lives, and along with politicians making calls on our behalf. You need to trust everyday New Zealanders, Prime Minister. It's relatively easy to go into lockdown. New Zealanders made the sacrifice. It's much harder to lead an economy back into recovery. But the best thing you can do is make the way back as simple as possible. That takes an understanding of business and the private sector, and a clear economic plan for jobs and for growth. Unfortunately, we know this government has a poor record of delivering. I worry about the government's ability to get us out of this crisis. I worry about their ability to come up with an economic plan and to execute it. Remember, this is the same government that failed to deliver Kiwi Build. The same government that failed to deliver light rail down Dominion Road. The same government that has failed to build any new roads, in fact, cancelled most of them. This year it announced a lot, and in this budget we see a lot of announcements, and it will continue to make those announcements. But nothing's happening. It's one thing to have a Labour government in the good times, but not in a deep recession. We must not let mismanagement, missteps and missed opportunities continue. National has the team with the track record of managing New Zealand through times of economic crisis, whether the global financial crisis or earthquakes. We won't keep on talking with working groups and committees and reports. We will trust everyday New Zealanders and competently, pragmatically implement our plan. We've got the competence and the track record to do what we say we will. National will deliver on its promises. It was National that invested in Kiwis getting ultra-fast broadband, which has made the past couple of years, or months I should say, more bearable and productive. It was National that started and had a plan to continue the roads of national significance. It was National that built the Waterview Tunnel and gave the green light to the City Rail link in Auckland. It was National that increased investment in R&D and science during its 9 years to help accelerate innovation. I was deeply involved in all of those actions, as were so many of my colleagues here. New Zealanders want a government that can deliver. And I would back National's Paul Goldsmith over Grant Robertson, Judith Collins over Phil Twyford, Todd McClay over Calvin Davis, Michael Woodhouse over David Clark, Louise Upston over Carmel Sepuloni, plus the rest of my team over any of Labour's team any day of the week, Mr. Speaker. New Zealanders know that National will get the job done and get New Zealand working again. A national budget would include a 5-point plan back to progress for our country. First, lighten the lockdown. Get Kiwis back to work unless there's an overwhelming reason not to. Second, save jobs by getting cash to small businesses most in need. Last week we announced that we would introduce an $8 billion GST Cashback Scheme for businesses. That would allow them to claim up to $100,000 GST refunds and up to $250,000 in low-interest loans. That would do much more than the government's less targeted and less generous loan scheme or anything announced in the budget today to save businesses and jobs in the private sector, where we know it's small businesses through large businesses that actually are the engine room of growth and a plan for prosperity for our country. We also announced we would allow businesses to instantly deduct investments up to $150,000. That would incentivise investment, which would help to stimulate the economy as we recover from this crisis. Third, we need a bit of common sense and pragmatism around the rules for the 1 or 2 metre world. It's one thing to allow bars and cafes to reopen, but if the rules mean that you just lose money, what's the point? Fourth, and I'm serious about this, we would unlock private sector investment, which is the key for growth and innovation. We won't rely on Wellington committees to reinvent the economy. We'll trust Kiwis to work out how to get back on their feet. We'll keep taxes low. We won't regulate firms to death or keep changing the rules. We'll back them to succeed. And fifth, we'll use the government's balance sheet to invest in large, high-quality infrastructure, and we'll actually get it done. Like National did with ultra-fast broadband and upgrading our skills, turbocharging the innovation sector and improving the quality of public services, such as health. We need a budget that backs New Zealanders. I urge the government to implement our proposals. They will save businesses and jobs and inject the massive stimulus required into the economy. Instead, when New Zealanders look at today's budget, they'll see some of the bleakest economic forecasts this country has seen in living memory. Widespread unemployment, growing debt, a decade of deficits. It's easy to get lost in all of the big numbers today. The 4-year projections of spending, the extra billions in debt, the debt to GDP ratio. We forget that each of those numbers, all of the numbers in fact, represent a bigger challenge. The burden we place on New Zealanders and the responsibility we have to them. We forget that a decade of deficits and debt means fewer choices for our kids down the road. The obligation we as parliamentarians have to make sure the next generation is better off than we are. That they have more choices, more opportunities, more ability to succeed in the world because we back them, not burden them with debt. Because I want my 2-year-old daughter, Jemima, in a couple of decades to buy her first home without having to pay high taxes. I want the young apprentice from Timaru who emailed me and who wants to set up his own business to do so without having to pay higher taxes and be crippled by that tax. I want all New Zealanders to have the future they want. That means a government with a plan that doesn't just accept that debt and deficits are our future. That means a government with the vision and the determination to get New Zealand working again. And that means we need a plan for growth. We need a plan for saving jobs. We need a plan for keeping debt low so future generations are not saddled with more debt. We are yet to see a comprehensive plan from this government. As I said before, it's easy to spend the money, but there's no plan here. We needed to see in this budget specific solutions to save businesses and jobs, the growth engine of our country, and a plan on how this government will responsibly manage that very same economy. We need to put trust in Kiwis to unleash their creativity and their ingenuity. Let Kiwis unleash their potential and plans. Let's back and trust everyday New Zealanders to succeed. Let's unlock New Zealand and get New Zealand working again. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker.
Order. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, business as usual in this place would dictate that today, Budget Day, is the day that the Minister of Finance comes down to this House and delivers the government's plan for the next year ahead, and in fact the plan for the next 3. Business as usual would then have the opposition stand and give a speech opposing that budget, including initiatives and funding that has the potential to get our economy growing as early as next year. Business as usual would have everyone in this House retrench into their old patterns that the public knows so well, but if we're all being honest, probably have very little time for. Today, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid the Leader of the Opposition has assumed it's business as usual. But nothing, and I mean nothing, about this time in our history is usual, and so neither should our response be. We have been a government that, with the support and efforts of New Zealanders, took us through an enormous health challenge, and we will take the same approach to the recovery of our economy. Mr. Speaker, I see that Mr. Bridges did not move a motion of no confidence in this budget, and I take that as an assumption that the opposition will vote for this budget today. I hope so, because this is a period in our history that is a global crisis. And to see this budget for what it is, a response to the rainy day we have planned for. Now is the time to come together as politicians, to say that a rainy day demands of us that we shelter and protect New Zealand to weather the storm. Rather than argue about who gets to hold the umbrella, I hope the opposition steps away from business as usual and does vote for a budget that delivers jobs. Mr. Speaker, a mere 6 months ago, nobody would have imagined a world that is in the grips of a global COVID-19 pandemic, let alone one that would wreak havoc across health systems and the global economy. I still vividly remember at the beginning of the year reading about the first lockdowns overseas and thinking how remarkable it was to ask humans to stay in one place for such a long period of time just seemed unfathomable. And yet here we are, having shut our borders and moved into lockdown and collectively built a wall of defence to a virus that was closing in on the world. Mr. Speaker, there are few things now that I think I will ever consider to be outside the bounds of possibility anymore. And perhaps that is the same perspective we now need as we start our recovery. We have to be focused. We have to be decisive. We have to go into this period knowing that it will be tough, but that there is hope and there is possibility. In short, I give my commitment to New Zealanders that they will see us, this government, apply the same unrelenting focus we have had on our health response to COVID-19 to our economic response. and that work has already started. From the very beginning, we have said that jobs were our focus, and they are. That is why in March we announced a wage subsidy scheme designed to keep people connected to work and to certainty and the dignity that comes with work. That program has supported roughly 1.6 million New Zealanders to date and has meant that we have thus far avoided the spike in unemployment other countries have experienced while our country was in lockdown and our businesses were unable to open. It helped get many workers and businesses through the toughest weeks so that they now have the chance to reopen and move to recovery. But we must keep going. The times ahead will be tough. Global predictions are dire. Unemployment will rise and growth will slow dramatically. We know as a trading nation that will have an impact, and it will be significant and it will be painful. We have never sugarcoated what the future will look like, but nor will we pretend that there is nothing we can do about it. Governments have choices, just as we did when we faced COVID-19. And those choices are between sitting back and hoping or sitting up and taking action. We have chosen to act. Today, we start by extending the wage subsidy. Now, it won't be the same as the first time round as we look to make it more targeted. We know that there are businesses who are opening up again, but we also know that there are some who cannot just yet, while others will take more time to recover. It serves no one if in the meantime, while businesses are opening back up, they lay off staff unnecessarily. I know how important this is. I've received countless emails from people describing what a difference the wage subsidy has meant to them, and almost all of them, they talk about their staff being their family and how important retaining and looking after them has been. So today, we are extending the wage subsidy for another 8 weeks with a focus on providing support to businesses who have been particularly affected by COVID-19. This will mean businesses and sectors like tourism and other small businesses across the country will be supported, and it will ease the recovery for thousands. And like the first round of the wage subsidy saved jobs, this targeted extension will save jobs too. That's why it's in such an important part of this jobs budget. We believe it's the best thing we can do at this phase of our recovery to help businesses who are getting back on their feet and to support their staff. But our response must go beyond supporting those still in work. This isn't enough. Too many people have already lost their jobs, and we need to support their path back to employment. For them, we must be swift. We must be practical. But we also owe it to ourselves to take this opportunity to solve the problems of both today and the problems of yesterday as we go. If I'd asked you before COVID-19 what it is we must address as a nation, what are our current challenges, I imagine that many people would write a very similar list. We have long faced a housing crisis. Our environment has been suffering. Inequality and child poverty have all been issues that we have had to tackle. In 3 years' time, I want to look back and say that COVID-19 was not the point those issues got worse, but the chance we had to make them better. We can emerge from this crisis stronger than we were before. That's why we are focused on jobs, but also jobs that solve each of these entrenched problems. So let's look at how. We have had a skills deficit, and now on top of that, we have more people who need the chance to train or retrain. That's why this budget will target vocational training and apprenticeships we need most and make them free. And I don't just mean school leavers, I mean everyone. It will mean more people training in building and construction and agriculture and manufacturing, community health, counselling and care work. This will help those who have lost their jobs retrain and others to train on the job. And while many have lost work, there are others who have labour shortages. Even through COVID-19, people have wanted to buy our high-quality food and fibre. And that's why in this budget we'll be looking to partner and support 10,000 New Zealanders into the primary sector and the jobs that they need filled now. For our young people, those who so often carry the brunt of crises like this, we will fund 1,000 more places in Trades Academy, expand He Poutama Rangatahi to support young people into work in Western South Auckland, Hamilton, Porirua and East Christchurch, and build group training schemes that support Māori apprenticeships. All in all, Mr. Speaker, this is a $1.6 billion investment into New Zealand's future and into rebuilding apprenticeships, into closing our skills gap. And that will be so important because of our next challenge, Mr. Speaker, housing. Our response to COVID, on the face of it, had a very simple premise early on: stay home, save lives. But that simple requirement forced us all as a country to ask a question: what if you don't have a home? The answer was simple: we will find you one. And through hard work and huge collaboration between government, local government, iwi, and the community sector, that is exactly what happened. In the midst of this crisis, we have housed the chronically homeless in New Zealand, and now we need to keep it that way. In this budget, we are announcing an extra 8,000 houses, providing $5 billion of construction stimulus into the economy over the next 4 to 5 years for public housing and transitional housing. When combined with what we have already funded, this takes the number of housing places for those who need homes to 17,000 public houses and transitional housing. This represents the largest public housing building program in recent decades, and I hope it means that COVID-19 will be remembered as a period when New Zealand didn't just stay home, it made sure everyone had a home. Since coming into government, Mr. Speaker, we have seen countless other examples of the underinvestment in New Zealand's infrastructure. We've already invested $12 billion into the New Zealand Upgrade Program, and our $3 billion fund in this budget will be squarely focused on projects that are ready to create jobs, but also tackle issues like water infrastructure. But perhaps there is no better example of the way this budget can bring together the challenges of today and the challenges of yesterday than the jobs it will create in regional New Zealand to restore our environment. Whether it's working with iwi on pest control to prevent the loss of North Island's forest, working with farmers to tackle everything from wallaby to fencing waterways or stabilising riverbanks, or working with council, local government, local businesses and DOC to employ thousands of people to restore wetlands, boost predator control, improve tracks and huts. This is win-win. Wilding pine controls alone require on-foot labour, chainsaw operators, heavy machinery operators, helicopters. It has a knock-on effect to accommodation, vehicles, repairs, maintenance, and even food providers. In total, this budget creates almost 11,000 jobs for our environment, for our regions, for our people. And that, Mr. Speaker, brings me to the final challenge I wish to speak to today, and that is child poverty. We know this has the potential to get even worse than where we are now. And while we moved quickly, even before lockdown, providing increasing government support to those out of work through benefit increases, through the winter energy payment, today again we focus on kids with a major expansion of the Food in Schools program. We already started this program, and now we expand healthy lunches into schools so that for around 200,000 more children across the country, school lunches will be part of their everyday. Based on what we know, this will also create an estimated 2,000 jobs in local communities, jobs that can sometimes cater for the care requirements of sole parents, of mums, of dads who might have care responsibilities on their own. And equally important, It will mean in the tough days ahead we can guarantee our most vulnerable kids will get a filling, healthy lunch every school day. Mr. Speaker, I want to finish where I started, on our businesses, on our job creators, on our innovators, and on those who have carried such a huge burden over these last weeks and months. We know they have faced challenges too. Challenges, Mr. Speaker, that do predate COVID. They include the cost of innovation, the need to constantly make productivity gains, the challenge of growing beyond New Zealand if you choose to make that leap. And many small businesses, Mr. Speaker, do need extra support to look beyond just the domestic borders of New Zealand, to look to export into Australia and beyond.
All right, well, Heather Duplessis-Allen from Newstalk ZB Drivers here. Heather, you've had a little bit of a chance to look over it. It's been billed as the jobs budget. Does it do the job?
Yeah, look, to some extent it does. It has. There is an extension of the wage subsidy, which is largely what industry across the country has been calling for, and largely I'm thinking here about the hospitality industry and the tourism industry, who are both really, really keen on seeing this. The government is describing the wage subsidy scheme as more targeted. I think that's probably going a bit far. The only thing that has been tightened up there really is the requirement previously for a 30% drop in revenue. That's now down to 50%. That'll obviously tighten it up a wee bit, but to describe it as targeted, that is not the case at all. So there is a little bit of job saving going on there, but really that is about the extent of it. There is also some money set aside for retraining, which I think is really important, specifically with wanting to retrain hospo workers and aviation sector workers into the primary sector. So there's plenty going on in that space. I think the important thing to know about this is that while it's been billed as a kind of like recovery budget, a lot of money has been kept in the back pocket. So it's a $50 billion budget.
There's $20 billion rolling about, right?
There's $20 billion there, and it is going to be spent during the election campaign. And I think this will go some way to explaining why this budget is actually bereft of any kind of vision. This has been described in advance by Grant Robertson and the Prime Minister both as kind of resetting the economy and resetting New Zealand. If that is what you were looking for, you'd be really, really disappointed because there's nothing of the sort.
Good to hold over the voters, though, a bit, right? Because for 12 weeks, you've got a couple of months in there. That's leading right up to the election for those.
Although, I mean, you have to balance, do you want to play politics or do you want to save the economy? You know, and I mean, arguably they've done what is necessary right now. I find no fault in this, but they are leaving themselves exposed to that kind of criticism. I think there's very little, I mean, we're in the middle of a crisis, you know, this is not the time to be thinking about what you want to do in the big picture. So I think putting that money in your back pocket and saving it is probably the smart thing to do. But that is why they have oversold it by saying it's a reset. It's no reset here.
What's the national argument going to be then? Essentially, we spend the money better than you spend the money?
Oh, National Party?
Yeah.
They have, look, Simon Bridges' speech fell really flat. He's obviously been given the memo to stop being so shouty and negative, which means that he didn't really know what to do by the looks of things, so he just came in really flat today. His argument has been we need to open up the economy. Really awkward thing to be saying on the very day that we go into level 2 and the economy feels more open, so I'm not sure that he's going to get much in the way of, like anybody's ear on that
Hard
thing.
place for anyone to be in opposition, though, right? You don't want to be the one that says spend less money when the country is in a crisis. And so he's in a weird position. What do you say that's going to do anything?
Look, I don't know. I think the obvious thing to do is to support what has been done, say that is the right thing to do, and then present your own vision for how you're going to do it better. You know, and I think he's gone some way to doing that. He kind of had a bit of a punt at that. But look, again, Will, you know, the thing is we are in the middle of a crisis. I don't know that anybody's got the mental capacity to be dealing with his idea plus what you're trying to deal with right now and listening to what the government's saying. I just think there isn't an audience for him right now, which I think puts him in a really awkward place.
Yeah, and so much of it, I mean, this is all blue sky thinking in a way, and that we don't know what is going to happen, right? When we were talking about the budget last year, we had all of these dreams. We had the $12 billion in the infrastructure towards the end of last year. Nobody really knows where this is going to go in terms of the international economy. We're an export country.
Yeah.
There's hopeful numbers in here, but every government puts hopeful numbers in.
I would temper your optimism about it. I mean, I think if you look at the number of jobs that we're losing right up front, and then the hope that we're going to be back in the black with deficits, I mean, really small deficits, but deficits in 8 years, let's just put that in perspective, right? It took 7 7 years for us to get back into the black post the GFC and post the Christchurch earthquake. If you're telling me we're back in the black in 8 years past this, which is the biggest economic shock arguably since the 1930s, I'm looking at that thinking that's pretty optimistic.
The $80,000 number that Paul Goldsmith pulled out in terms of per household and the amount of debt going on per household, that's going to be a hard number for the Labour Party to shake, right? Because there's going to be a lot of not just young people looking at that going, that is an enormous amount of debt that's going on me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that there's obviously a bit of a move to try and drive a generational wedge there. But I think you have to get past the argument. I mean, you have to get this past people saying, yep, that's a lot of debt I don't necessarily understand. These are big numbers. They're beyond my own ability to comprehend it. And the alternative was what, you know? And so I don't think anybody's going to begrudge the government, and not in the first blush of this, for really going hard, taking on a lot of debt and spending it on people to kind of cushion the blow. I mean, that is what we've seen work before through the GFC, so I think that there's a little bit of appetite for that to work again.
Winning budget for an election? I know it's a weird question, but...
Look, you know what, I think that regardless of what they said today, I think they would have had to really stuff up to lose the election. My money is on Labour winning the election on the strength of what's happening, because if you think about where we are now, what is it, it's May, we've got June, July, August, September, so we've got 4 months before we're really in the election, having to make a decision. I'm not sure that the fear will have abated over COVID-19. People will still be frightened. They will still think that the Prime Minister and the government has done the right thing. Arguably, people wouldn't have felt the full brunt yet, I would imagine, of what's coming. So I think that, I don't think that I think that National would have a real push to take this one off Labour. I think this is Labour's election to win, unless something goes really badly, and I don't think that the budget really would have made a jot of difference to it. And that $20 billion is going to help a lot. Yeah, well, it goes wherever they want it to go, right? I suppose. What have you got coming up at 4 o'clock then? Oh, right. Okay, so 4 o'clock we're starting the drive show on News Talk ZB, so definitely worth tuning in. We'll have all the analysis. We'll have the best commentators available to pick through it and tell us what to think. We've got Shamabil Jacob and Fran O'Sullivan with their thoughts right up front. Well, we will be speaking to Simon Bridges about his speech in that hour. Also, Finance Minister Grant Robertson at 5 o'clock, and then we'll pick it over with our huddle again, Phil O'Reilly and Joseph Bagani. And, of course, lots and lots of reaction from the hospo sector. They're the guys who say they're the forgotten industry. We'll also talk to the tourism sector. Those guys will be absolutely gutted about the lack of support today, so everybody will have a say.
Heather Plession, thanks so very much. We'll look forward to 4 o'clock. We will be here as well, but first back to Parliament TV.
It's a budget that responds aggressively to our present conditions. It's a budget that will support our transition to recovery. And it's a budget that has our people, New Zealanders, front and centre. The COVID-19 pandemic is a completely new situation in which the Coalition has very few familiar guidelines to shape our response. We are in uncharted waters. In this novel situation, we look to history to help guide our thinking about the government's health and economic response and recovery strategies. US President Franklin Roosevelt's response to the Great Depression is one lesson to draw from. He had no playbook for his response, and nor do we. And we've had to learn as we go, always with the health of our most vulnerable people foremost in our mind. The first Labour government, you recall, 1935, responded to the ravages of the Great Depression with compassion and practical wisdom. The fourth Labour government, in contrast, responded through ideology and blind devotion to neoliberal economic theory. The former tradition helped the many survive a massive disruption, and its success shaped settled public policy, even National Party policy, for the next 50 years. In stark contrast, the revolutionary tradition adopted by Roger Douglas and Ruth Richardson favoured the few and left abandoned a lost generation of New Zealanders cynically cast adrift as no longer economically viable. This is a crisis where we need to park our ideology at the door. We can well recall at the beginning of the neoliberal experiment in 1984, its disciples saying, "Farming is a sunset industry." Oh, yes, I remember that. You remember that? I remember that. Farming is a sunset industry. Well, today, no, don't tell me it is one of them, because I was in the National Party at the time, where they were giving, that's Mr Brownlee's lot, the architect of that budget, Roger Douglas, 8 out of 10 for his budget. They're meant to be in the opposition. They're acting like a bunch of fifth columnists. Unbelievable. I know you hate to remember it, but I remember it with telling concern that here we are in 2020 and they've learned so little. You know, Mr Bridges, my advice on the first day of level 2 of the COVID crisis, level 2, is to get a haircut and get a real job. Can I just say, farming is, they said, a sunset industry. Well, let me ask you up there in the gallery, which industry is standing tall today? Which industry is standing tall today? And for any seeking to defend with blind ideology like Mr Brownlee, again, opens his mouth, lets the wind blow his tongue around. He uses these occasions to make a constant fool of himself. I want to tell the listeners in New Zealand today, that man shouting like a lunatic is Mr Brownlee from Christchurch, the woodwork teacher. For any seeking to defend, here he goes again. Can you hear him? See, noise he thinks is volume, and volume he thinks is substance. No, Mr Brownlee, I'll give you the short lessons in life. Just close your mouth, open your ears, you just might learn something for the first time. For any seeking to defend blind economic theory, there are countless other examples to destroy the validity of that belief. Desired ends and means need to match. And this coalition government's third budget locates the coalition's COVID-19 response closer to the first tradition, while it utterly rejects the second.
And now I have with me the man of the day is Finance Minister Grant Robertson with his home-done haircut. And Grant, you have described this as the most significant budget in modern history. How daunting is it for you? And how hard was it to put together in the time frame you had?
Oh, well, the circumstances of putting it together have been trying, but they're the same circumstances that every New Zealander has been going through in terms of COVID-19. So we did have to do things differently, and in fact, many parts of the budget weren't finalised until even Monday of this week. It is a significant budget. It makes a very significant investment in a lot of things that will change the future of New Zealand.
National has questioned whether or not there's a sufficient enough plan involved in the spending, and you do have $20 billion of the $50 billion package floating around ready for you to spend on something in the future. Is that a election slush fund, or in what circumstances would you anticipate needing that $20 billion?
Not at all. I mean, we've created this response and recovery fund to use as we need it, just as we have over the last 7 or 8 weeks. Actually, this money is going to be spent over the next few years rather than in any particular time frame, but it's about being there, being flexible and being ready to be able to do what we need to support New Zealanders through COVID-19. I think we've shown that in the last 2 months, that we've been prepared to move as we need to, but we are, as all countries in the world are still learning about COVID-19, so keeping some money back is actually a good idea.
Is that cushion a cushion in case there is a second wave of the virus, or is that already catered for in the existing spending package?
It is in part if we need it for that, but there will also be needs for the rest of our rebuild regardless. And look, New Zealanders have done incredibly well. We're moving well through level 3 into level 2, and I'm really optimistic that we'll be able to use that funding over the next year or two to help rebuild New Zealand. But yes, if we need it, if we do end up having to go backwards, that is part of the reason that money is there.
Can I ask you about the wage subsidy extension of 8 weeks? Is that effectively the last chance saloon for those businesses in the industries most hard hit, and here I'm talking mainly about tourism, that if they don't reshape themselves to cater for the new levels of demand, they basically go?
No, it's not. And obviously, alongside the wage subsidy scheme extension, we've put in place the $400 million contribution to the tourism recovery plan, and that plan will keep going, and I'm sure the government will end up putting more money in to support it. So along with the wage subsidy scheme, the small business loan scheme, the changes we've made in taxation, we have a package to support businesses through this. Now, the tourism sector...
How long for?
Yeah, but the tourism sector is one that does have to face a very, very unfortunate fact that our borders will be closed for some time. And I think most people in that industry know that, and what they want is our assistance to reorientate and plan for a different kind of business. That's what our package is about.
To give them time to reshape.
And to support them to do it.
Let's talk about the D words, deficit and debt. They're quite significant amounts compared to what you did have. They're amounts you never wanted to have to deliver. I'm assuming the fiscal responsibility rules have been put through the shredder long ago. How do you get to the point where you start looking at how you get that paid back or start paying it down?
Well, I think the really important thing about the budget responsibility rules is that we put them in place and we stuck to them, and we had net core crown debt below 20%. That means we are in a stronger position than most other countries in the world to do this. So we can take on the extra debt that we need to and still end up with a level of debt that is in fact among the lowest in the world. So we start from a really strong position. In terms of paying it back, we are going to be growing the economy sustainably, and actually the budget shows that debt does start to reduce in the out years. Our deficits come back and we end up in surplus within 5 to 8 years. We will be able to even bring that forward further if we can get the economy going through the investments we're making. But what I won't do is put myself in a position where we're artificially lowering that debt and not providing the services New Zealanders need.
You've said that now isn't the time for tax reform. When is?
Well, look, the period we're in now is to support New Zealand through recovery and rebuild. Over time, in the future, there will be decisions to be made about our tax system, but we can do this. We can afford to deal with this rainy day because we've been disciplined in our finances up to now.
The figure of a peak of 9.6% unemployment, did that come as a relief to you? Because the original forecasts, many of them were a lot higher than that, and it seems to be a relatively short-lived peak as well.
Yeah, look, I think those original forecasts were built off the fact that we wouldn't make such a big contribution as a government. Given that we have put at least $62.5 billion on the table for this, that means that I know we are, reducing those levels of unemployment. You know, this package is going to save up to 140,000 jobs. That is a critical element of keeping New Zealanders working, keeping them retrained for future jobs. So I'm not satisfied with unemployment at that level. I want to see it come down, but actually it's our investments that are making sure we're keeping it there.
Okay. Does your ability to respond get impacted by the election at all when you go into kind of caretaker mode?
Oh, look, I think in that period, we will be, I certainly hope and I'm optimistic that we'll be further down the alert levels at that period, that we'll actually be in a position where we'll be able to have life much more back to normal than we do now. But as a caretaker government, we still will be in government, we'll still be making the decisions we need to make.
Mainly, I'm talking here around the wage subsidy scheme, which again you'll have to revisit.
Yeah, look, we continually are revisiting the programs we're doing. I mean, I think you've seen that over the last 8 weeks, that where a program needs to be changed, needs to be tweaked, needs to be extended, we've been prepared to do that. We've done that today with the extension of the wage subsidy scheme, and we'll keep working on it.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you for your time.
Welcome back to the Herald Newsroom. I'm joined by Ingrid Cronin-Knight, the country manager from MYOB. Ingrid's going to talk to us a little bit about the budget for small business, right? Obviously, the wage subsidy scheme continues for some. I argued before there'll be a lot of people that it won't continue for, and a lot of small businesses quite upset with this notion that they need to report a 50% drop in revenue in order to get a hold of the cash.
In the 30 days prior to applying for it, yeah. I think that it's great news actually for many sectors that have been hit. We know construction's down, we know that tourism's down, and the hospitality sector is down significantly now. So I think that threshold will actually apply to many businesses. We've seen through our data that invoicing is drastically reduced through the 4-week lockdown period, and now on alert level 2, people are getting back into trading for it, so it might not apply to all, and I think that businesses would prefer to trade their way out of it if they could, because that's what they do well. But this is, I think, a really positive step to help those businesses and sectors that have been, heavily hit.
With the data that you have, how many businesses could potentially go under if this wasn't on the table?
We don't have the specifics to be able to say that, because it depends on how much demand comes back, and so get out and support your local business, because that will be the best thing to do, is to get money back into local businesses working through this. But what we can say is that there's also some good news for tourism sector, like 400 million to help relieve with their pain. I think that, and reshape what's next for them. That's a positive thing. And I also thought the primary sector, helping them deal with Bovis for many small farmers, I think that'll make a big difference as well. So there was about 190 million in that.
The key attack from the National Party is basically not the amount of money, because who would criticise the amount of money given that we're in unprecedented times, but basically how it's sort of going to be spent. There's a lot of money going into tourism, for example, and a lot of people are looking at tourism and going, well, there's very little chance that this industry will bounce back in years. So is there not a chance that they're going to be open to the attacks, that they're throwing good money after bad?
I think ultimately you want to have viable businesses, and so demand will have drastically shrunk. But we've got some great assets here, and so you want to keep those investments there to keep them through, because demand will come up. It'll come from the Australian bubble first, sure. as we blend that. Then it'll reach further, and I think that New Zealand's got some fantastic, making sure that we keep the virus low. Then will be a great destination and location. So
where could they have done more on? And the reason I wonder this is because you look at some of the allocation of spending. For example, obviously there's coalition partners that have had a sway on this budget to a degree, with the $1 billion plus going into the environment. Then you've got money going into sort of infrastructure, the $20 billion slush fund. Where could businesses themselves actually benefit from some of that money? Where could that money be filed, as opposed to supporting the state sector, if you will?
Well, I think there were some really good opportunities that did come through it. So if you look at the R&D investment, there was $150 million through Callaghan that was put in place to help stimulate that. So we'd love to see that be available to SMEs to help them grow. Yeah. We saw that there was some investment around trade and global trade to help reinforce our economy and proposition, and also digitise what we offer as well, given what's happening with the borders. And that was $260 million. So that was I think, a good outcome. I think that there was an announcement around $10 million to help small businesses digitise and trade with e-commerce and stimulation. Sure. And I think that was fantastic news for businesses, because what we know is that if you are actually trading digitally, you actually have higher revenue statistically to other partner providers. Other businesses. And I think in that infrastructure, that $3 billion, what we want to see is that there's a proportion of that is ensure that it's spent by small businesses and medium-sized business owners. And so
as
if you can do that,
opposed to going to the big conglomerates,
that's right.
Maybe you look at there's also the money in the retraining, right, which is probably a big asset, because a lot of these SMEs were looking for staff, and I guess if government's going to file money towards it, they're also going to train the people to potentially get in there and get involved with those SMEs.
Well, it was a huge win, $1.6 billion going
massive.
Into the apprenticeship
but
program.
But everything's massive now.
That's right. But I think that you asked about what more could be done. I really think that if we can make sure that where they are investing, if it's like the schools refurbishment program, ensuring that a proportion of that goes into the pockets of SME business owners, I think that would make a big difference.
Okay.
The other thing, though, is and we're just starting to see this now for businesses that are failing, the mental well-being of small business owners. Like, we do know that this is a government that supports well-being, and we don't have any targeted initiatives to small business owners and medium-sized business owners. But with failure, we know their identity gets challenged, and if you could put some more money to help support them through it, we need all their entrepreneurial flair to help our way out of this. And so helping them get through this process if they do have failures is important.
Is there enough in there? The National Party has been not great at all the things at the moment, but seemingly very good at positioning themselves as the party of the farmers. Have they done enough there when we're looking at the spending, a lot of it, again, going to the environment, a lot of it going into the state sector, if you will? Have they done enough with farmers? Farmers were asking around things, for example, water storage and stuff like that. They argue that they're the wheelhouse of the economy, and they're also going to be, the businesses that are picking up some of those people that end up on the job market as a result of, losses in tourism and stuff like that. Could they not have supported agriculture slightly more? Is it just the antithesis of their sort of dreams with vegans and all this kind of stuff that's in the Labour Party?
Well, I wouldn't say that about the Labour Party, but what I would say though is that our primary industries, they've been our essential workers, have seen us through this lockdown period, and we've seen investment in them. I think there's $20 billion that they're holding back, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see more of it go into those spaces. There's challenges around our waterways. There's green investment. I know that they're going to make more announcements between now and the election about what they want to do in that space, and some of it will have to be in concert with farmers and what they want to do. And so I would think there will be more for farmers.
I wonder, does small business talk to government enough about their issues and communicate what could help them enough, particularly left-wing governments? Because often you read the headlines of the small business attacking, particularly during this crisis around the wage subsidy and stuff like that, around the problems that they have with government policy. Is it just natural that small business aligns to one political perspective and they're less comfortable with going to the government and talking about what they want? Or are they making their, what they need very clear?
Look, I think what we've seen with this government is it's one that's really willing to listen to business and adapt to what the feedback is coming from business. I think they're well engaged with the business community and listening to it. The fact that there's $10 million in there for e-commerce and helping support shows that that they have been listening to the business community about it. The fact that there is the wage subsidy extension and the business loan scheme, when we came out and said that the guarantees that they were making with the banks wasn't working and people were getting rejected, they then came out with the business loan scheme, which we have seen that really help some small business owners in the short term. And I think if you can finance their liquidity challenges through this period, that's going to be a really good outcome. Yeah,
not to mention the quantitative easing and the printing of sort of 30 billion yesterday, sort of trying to encourage those banks even further with the stick as opposed to the carrot. We're going back now to Parliament TV, or possibly Wellington, I'm not sure. Let's see.
Mr. Speaker, the day that New Zealand declared a national state of emergency and went into level 4 lockdown, there were 50 new cases. 50 new cases on just that one day. 50 cases that took the total number of cases from 155 to 205. That's a 1/3 increase in the total number of cases from just the day before. At that time, it seemed that we were on our way up an exponential J-curve of human misery, mortality and mourning. And on that day, as we passed the motion to declare a national state of emergency, I said that everything that we do from now onwards, we're doing to protect the people that we know and love and also those that we don't. And over the past 7 weeks, people in every home, in every community, in every business across New Zealand has done exactly that. Mr. Speaker, there are today only a handful more active cases in total as there were new cases the day that we went into lockdown. Over the past 7 weeks, every one of us has protected and cared for every one of us. But none have done more than those we have come to know as our essential workers. These are the people who left their families every day and risked their own health every day so that the rest of us could be cared for and get everything we needed, like the ingredients of sourdough bread. Our nurses and our pharmacists, doctors and midwives, paramedics and social workers, aged care and community workers and caregivers more generally, our police officers, our customs officers and those who worked to get our homeless into emergency housing, our farmers and food producers, our delivery drivers, our supermarket staff and dairy owners, the people who, it turns out, are actually the ones that make our economy run. These people have always been essential. And yet there are people in this House, members of this House, who still do not believe that these people deserve to be paid enough to live on. And I have listened to the Leader of the Opposition thank our essential workers for carrying this country through the state of emergency, and they do deserve our thanks, of course, but they cannot eat thanks, Mr. Bridges. They cannot heat their homes with thanks. They do deserve our thanks, but they need our support. And now that the worst of the health crisis does appear to be behind us, let's make sure that these people have the lives and the livelihoods that they truly deserve. And that, Mr. Speaker, is what this budget is all about. Livelihoods, jobs that see us through this crisis and that craft a future that works for everyone. This budget is about and actually Mr Bridges said he's got a 5-point plan. Well, I'm going to do it in 4. This budget is about, first of all, keeping as many people in their jobs as possible. Second, where that's not possible, it's about getting people the training and the education that they need to get a new job as soon as possible. Third, it's about supporting people who don't have a job to be able to support themselves and make ends meet and provide for their families in the meantime. And fourth, it is about investing directly in the creation of new jobs, jobs that provide a good day's pay, doing meaningful work, building an even better country than the one that went into lockdown just 7 weeks ago.
And I have Simon Bridges, the leader of the National Party, with me. Simon, the budget, essential or a fizzer?
Look, perhaps neither of those options. I mean, I think, though, there are some things about it that worry me for, I suppose, the long term and generationally. I look at it and there's some good things. I think to see the wage subsidy extended in a targeted way is really good. But I do say overall, look, we run the danger of turning a $40–50 billion problem into a $140 billion one with more debt. That inevitably, I think, under Labour means more taxes and means a legacy, really a mortgaging of our children, our grandchildren's future. I think the only other thing I would say pretty clearly is the Prime Minister said it's about jobs, jobs, jobs. That's crucially important when we have 1,000 people a day going on the dole queue. I don't think we saw a real plan for jobs and growth. We saw a lot of spending, but not that plan to unleash the private sector and get jobs created.
You mean government-sponsored jobs are there, but not private sector jobs?
Look, at a level, I think that's right. And there's nothing to say that that's entirely wrong. But I think to have truly sustainable job creation, that comes from the private sector. And we didn't actually see in an interesting way a lot of business support and things there for the private sector, which I think is going to be the engine room of our recovery. Yes, with government help, but that plan wasn't there. Yep, spending's the easy part. And indeed, a $50 billion fund's been set up where the Finance Minister can't even tell us how the last $20 billion is going to be spent. Presumably, in the lead up to election, we'll see that in electioneering, but not the plan for jobs and growth.
I just asked the Finance Minister about that $20 billion left, and he said it wasn't a slush fund. It's more or less a cushioning because they don't yet know how it will tail out, so it gives them wriggle room to move further if they need to in the future, which is surely understandable. I mean, if there's a second wave hits New Zealand...
That would be understandable, I think, at a level. But I think to do that, actually, it's nearly $25 billion. It isn't. You know, all of that money is money that was cold, hard New Zealanders' cash that will have to be paid back. We're talking here at $140 billion more debt at $80,000 a household that will have to be paid back. And I think the government's setting itself up an election year, and that's one thing. But, you know, spending's the easy part. We need the plan for jobs and growth.
In that regard, if you look at the unemployment figures and the GDP growth rate figures in particular, they both bounce back fairly soon. Like GDP growth goes into the positive again in 2 years, and unemployment is the same. It peaks at 9.6 in a month's time and then trails back down to 4.2 over the next 2 years.
I think those figures are I hope, right, but very optimistic. And I think ultimately, you know, what we would need to see those happen is that plan and is an implementation delivery on that plan. I mean, I think the truth, the government has had difficulties delivering, whether economically or whether through KiwiBuild or other things. And, you know, I suppose what we would say in National is we feel we are a party that does have a plan, that does have the team with the track record. And we've seen crises, the GFC and earthquakes, where, we borrowed $50 billion, but we didn't have to increase taxes. We paid it back and the economy came back stronger.
Well, with the Labour government hasn't increased taxes either.
No, but what we see here is a whole lot of spending, not 50 billion, not 60, 70, 80 billion. Yeah. You know, ultimately is 140 billion additional spend, which takes our debt out to like 200 billion. That's a lot for a little country. It's 54% of our GDP. And, you know, some would say, well, you go to Europe and you'll see those sort of numbers. But here in New Zealand, we've also got a lot of private debt. those things I think will worry New Zealanders, particularly, as I say, when they don't see the spending going on, the real issues right now, which is health and education, and then a plan for jobs and growth.
Can I just ask you what worries you or offends you, whatever the right word is, the most? Is it the $50 billion figure, or is it the way it is being utilised?
Well, I think it's the 50 billion plus the then additional, I get my maths wrong, but nearly 100 billion, 90 billion more, all up. You can make your case for various parts of things, right? You know, whether $1 billion for rail, the tourism I think is good. Actually, ironically, I thought they would do more for that sector with 400,000 jobs, pest eradication and so on. Look, they've all got, at one level you might say, their worth, but it's that overall amount where the finance minister can't even say, well, 25 billion of it, what he's going to do with it, that I think will worry New Zealanders, because it has to be paid back, because it does mean more debt, because that debt inevitably, I think, at those numbers, means higher taxes from Labour if they win another term.
If you are the government after the election, you will be saddled with having to deal with that debt and those deficits. Has this taken tax cuts off the table for you?
Well, I think in truth, if you look at this, we know with the government, they're good on announcements, delivery they find harder. Whether Kiwi Build, whether it's light rail, whether it's some of the things they've announced here. And so, I think in truth, let's hope that some of the things that perhaps aren't on the core issues of health, education, saving jobs, aren't spent, so that actually we can get debt back in a slightly more reasonable position, so that New Zealanders don't have to pay it back. Yeah, we can come out of this, we can invest, and there'll be some debt, but let's hope under a national-led government, not at the numbers we see here from the Labour-led government.
Did you actually answer my question?
Which was tax cuts?
Is it off the table?
Well, I think now, in truth, clear what National needs to do is go back and look at the numbers really carefully. I would make the case that here, while there's money for lots of government stuff, we don't see the money for the private sector that's going to be that engine room of growth. There may be a role for tax relief there for small businesses, possibly others, so that actually they do what we wanted to see happen, which is creating those jobs.
You don't answer questions in very long-fashioned ways, Mr. Bridges. The tourism industry, they've been given, well, along with other businesses, but another 8 weeks of wage subsidies, and then there's a package too, which seems to be predominantly for a marketing campaign for domestic tourism. Would you see that as a last chance saloon, I guess, for those tourism companies to either adjust to surviving in a lower revenue world, or they're off? I mean, you cannot prop a sector up forever.
I support the wage subsidy and the extension of it. I think that's good. In truth, it's masking some of the issues here. I would have expected to see some more innovative, and frankly, in terms of numbers, although I think overall the numbers are too big, a bit more done in the tourism sector. We're working on some plans in that area, and what we would do to prop up and enable tourism. So, last chance saloon? No. I think tourism will have a great future again in New Zealand, but I don't know when we see, $1.2 billion for Kiwi Rail, that we've seen enough from this government for tourist operators.
Well, that was related to tourism because it's for the inter-islander ferries.
Yep, and that's great, but those inter-islanders aren't going to magically appear sometime in the next 2 or 3 months.
You're just picking on that because it's Winston Peters, Lolly.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, you are.
No, I'm not.
Okay, that's grand.
Thanks very much.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
G'day everyone, welcome back to Budget Day 2020 here on nzherald.co.nz, and of course Facebook Live as well. We're going to give you the top line numbers now on everything that's been happening in the last couple of hours since 2 o'clock when we first got the details, and boy are the details big. $50 billion in new spending. It's the biggest budget in living memory, however you cut it. Obviously, the government will argue this is because they are so concerned about what is going to happen with New Zealand's economy in addition to what's happening with the globe. Where is all that money going then? Well, the PM says she hopes that it'll maintain and save 138,000 jobs. The big ticket item is the extension of the wage subsidy that already exists. Now, how businesses get hold of that is a little bit different now. They need to prove that they have lost 50% of their revenue in order to get a hold of that money. So there'll be some businesses obviously maybe a little bit critical of that, you would have to imagine. Now, the numbers are where National is really critical. They're saying by 2024 the government will have borrowed close to $200 billion. It's more than doubling the $90 billion they already owe. So that's National's Finance Minister Goldsmith saying basically New Zealanders should be really concerned about that, but also really concerned about how the government spends the money. They're saying, okay, money, sure enough, this is a crisis, you have to put money into the economy, but we know how to spend it better than they do. Bad idea politically, obviously, to say that you don't want more money in the economy when we're going through what we're going through. Other big ticket items, you'd never have guessed this was a Labour budget. We had the wage subsidy. The Greens, or a coalition government, I should say, the Greens are getting a little over $1 billion actually for the environment. There's more money going to the railways as well. Again, it's a fun one for the Labour and New Zealand First coalition there at least. $3 billion in infrastructure. That's going to be a big one. We heard from Ingrid Cronin-Knight earlier. She said she wants to see small and medium-sized enterprises getting a hold of some of that money and participating in those really big infrastructure projects. We had announcements last year, remember, of huge amounts of infrastructure spending as well. You know, the electrification of the rail network, for example, from Papakura out to Pukekohe. These sort of jobs, small and medium-sized enterprises want to be involved in that as the demand in the private sector goes down, and the government is providing plenty of cash for it as well. $1.6 billion for trades and training to reskill workers. A lot of those workers, you'd imagine, will be coming from tourism, for example, people coming from perhaps the airlines as well. We've lost a lot of people in that sector as well, and they're more or less saying, we don't know when this industry will, or if it even ever will, normalise. In saying that, the government has allocated $400 million to support the tourist operators, basically saying, you know, if they're going to spend all that money on the environment and getting New Zealand cleaner and greener, then we need to have the tourism operators around for when we do open up the economy again. A big angle of that is around the domestic economy, obviously, but also there's potential that we have a trans-Tasman bubble with Australia. We want to bring some of those Aussies over here and show them the best of New Zealand, so that is where that money goes. Interestingly enough, no $1,500 cheque. We've all been talking about that in terms of stimulus, in terms of the government injecting that money. But what they do have is another $20 billion slush fund, essentially, which they can allocate during this financial year. In reality, we all know that these are budgets in unprecedented times. We've seen them spend a fortune already, $20 billion already, just to deal with COVID this far. So they're not going to be afraid of spending more money, but there is a $20 billion there. And dependent on where the economy obviously goes, particularly, you might argue, before the next election, that money will be at the ready. National highly critical of that, saying we're the best ones to spend it. But again, not critical of how much money is going, even though $50 billion is allocated for just on COVID in this budget. Forestry, infrastructure and SOEs, his job just got a whole lot bigger. Here is Shane Jones with Claire in Wellington.
Well, the smaller projects are being signed off on a weekly basis by the Provincial Growth Fund. But look, you put your finger on a big problem. There are three areas that we as a government need to, quite frankly, strip the treacle away from. David Parker has served up a product in terms of the Resource Management Act. That cobweb will be simplified. Secondly, our procurement policies, they need to be very focused on rapid decision making. And thirdly, the Building Act and the Public Works Act have been identified by large infrastructure players as handbrakes. And we're waiting for the relevant ministers to bring back those reports, and the Deputy Prime Minister and I have been told that they're working as fast as they can. Obviously, not quite as fast as David Parker has managed to pull off.
Can I just add to that answer that Honourable Shane Jones has given? You say that they are laying people off now. Well, no, they shouldn't be. But we've got an extension today of the workers' subsidy. We've got an extension today, $4 billion with respect to businesses. And so we put that in there so they can adjust and take time while we turn around the economy and let them know that we've got their backing. And it's only the beginning of our support. So when you say that, well, that's not quite true, because we've got the interregnum money, short-term money, the bridge money or the span money, so they can stay in the game, because we know it's much cheaper to keep a business going than try to start a new one.
On that though, Mr. Peters, businesses have already said that they have been having to shut down though and lay people off because they've said that the wage subsidy doesn't cover things like rent and other costs that they have coming in. Yes, it covers employees, but there's all those other costs. And they've had the issue of commercial rent, not having any sort of agreement there about putting a freeze on that. So are you saying that businesses shouldn't be laying people off like they have been?
No, there are thousands of rentals where there's been a mass reduction because the landlords know that it's better to have a tenant, albeit if it's only paying 20, 30 or 40%, it sure beats one that's never going to pay this year, next year, or the year after. So a lot of landlords have made serious strategic decisions already. Some have even been given a 1-year moratorium, not asking for it to be paid back. So you cannot, in a universal way, make that statement. And there are a lot of different circumstances, and we are mindful of it. And the point is, if you want in any way to stay in the business and you've got your heart and soul by it, we've got enough funding in there to keep you going until hopefully we can turn it around. And I believe tourism will turn around dramatically faster than people think. Why? Because I think the Tasman bubble is going to be open far more quickly. And where will Australians have to go? Nowhere but New Zealand. And where can we go? And we're the second biggest tourist to Australia. Nowhere but Australia. Or we can go within our own countries. But that diminished marketplace option, even though people won't be as wealthy, given that the options are only us two countries, should see a far greater and more rapid recovery of tourism in some parts of our economy that hitherto have been written off.
G'day everyone. Welcome back to our NZ Herald coverage of Budget 2020. What an enormous budget it is, in fact. $50 billion spending spree across the board. And if you ask the opposition, well, they didn't really have much of a choice. The key that the opposition will be looking at in the future, they keep saying, is where is that money going to go? The $20 billion slush fund is probably the thing where the eyes will be most keenly trained. We're going to leave you. I understand David Seymour from ACT is speaking in Parliament TV. A programming note, though, at 4:30 p.m, the Prime Minister will be speaking as well, so stick around for that. For all the panellists, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next time. Bye for now.
30-cent rate to 17.5. Mr. Speaker, that budget would allow the government to spend only an extra $40 billion. It would have saved the next generation and the current generation of New Zealanders $100 billion of borrowing that this government is about to undertake. And how? Because the other thing that's missing from this budget is any kind of analysis or focus on improving the quality of spending already there. So on the one hand, the government says these are extraordinary times. That's the approach to expenditure. Then they say it's business as usual. That's the approach to existing expenditure. So we have extraordinary new expenditure, business as usual normal expenditure, and a budget blowout and $140 billion, 70 grand per household in extra debt. And then we have the question of why it's so hard to get stuff done. The government's recently discovered what the private sector knew about the Resource Management Act all along. It makes it damn difficult to get things done. And the government's solution is to exempt its own projects from the Resource Management Act, leaving the burden on everyone else. Well, the ACT Party says that's the wrong way round. We should be replacing the Resource Management Act with the Better Urban Planning Initiative from the Productivity Commission so that everybody can build more easily to get this economy going.
Is this idea of retraining, is it realistic at scale? I mean, are people who are being laid off in the hospitality industry realistically going to want to retrain in construction and trades-related industries?
Oh, and in fact, you see, therefore, that's why we're not looking just at construction. We need a workforce in mental health. We need a workforce in care. There are a range of jobs, including in the primary production sector, where we need skilled people. We've already seen it. In tourism, 200 jobs out of Matamata, gone. Already they have been placed into our primary production sector, and they are earning more. That's exactly the kind of repositioning we need because we have industries at the moment that need jobs and others that are losing them. I'll give you another example. Dairy NZ right now are campaigning to get 1,000 workers before the 1st of June before Gypsy Day. We can support now the training and education of a workforce in, for instance, those needs of those on farm and on the job. So at the moment, there are sectors that need employees, and we've got those who are losing jobs. So we should be ambitious and work on training them for those jobs.
People may not actually want those jobs, I guess. I mean, they may feel forced into them, but that might not be what they actually want to do.
And I think that's why, actually, it's not just about retraining into jobs where we have a skills gap. It's about training and education for jobs that are decent with decent wages. And that makes a huge difference into the attractiveness of being part of those industries. We have a chance through this rebuild and recovery to drive a high wage economy with decent jobs for New Zealanders, to retrain those who have not had the chance to build their skills, and that's exactly what our COVID response plan will do. Last question.
Yeah, the Greens were promised an overhaul of the welfare system. What's happened to that?
In fact, the investment in welfare, roughly in the order of over $2.5 billion, was one of the first things we did as part of our COVID response plan. So at the first phase of our 3-point plan was additional investment in the welfare system. It contained a general benefit increase, the likes of which we have not seen in a very long time, and also the doubling of the winter energy payment. Today we add to the support specific funding for those with orphans benefit and unsupported child benefit as well. Okay.
The story behind Grant Robertson's tie?
I have a budget of a budget day tradition of giving the Minister of Finance a new tie, and that's not to say anything negative about the Finance Minister's tie collection, but that has been going obviously for 3 years, and this year we found a small business owner up north who hand makes ties, and so it's a linen tie that I'm told she worked through the night to produce and send down specifically for the Minister of Finance to wear today. The story of her business is lovely, so I encourage you to take a look at her website. All right, thanks everyone.